There are people who go through life surrounded by people, but never truly accompanied. Others simply walk alone, not for lack of trying, nor always due to direct rejection, but for something more silent, deeper, and often difficult to explain. Loneliness in these cases is not a social accident, it's a psychological pattern. And understanding this pattern completely changes how we look at those who have no friends, and at ourselves. Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe it's you. Someone who observes more than speaks, who feels out of place in groups, who keeps their distance even when there is interest, or who simply cannot sustain bonds over time. Society often labels these people as cold, strange, or antisocial. But psychology shows that this explanation is too superficial. In this video, we will analyze the psychology behind people who have no friends, exploring personality traits, unconscious mechanisms, and patterns of social behavior that help explain this phenomenon. We will understand why some people distance themselves, why others never get close, and what this reveals about the human mind. Throughout the video, you'll realize that loneliness isn't always a sign of weakness, and that in many cases, it's a logical psychological response to profound experiences. When loneliness isn't rejection, it's protection. There's a type of person who doesn't distance themselves because they hate people, but because they learned too early on that closeness comes at a high price. Jung said that what hurts us repeatedly ends up shaping our way of existing in the world. Some people don't have friends because their brains have associated connection with wear and tear, demands, or invasion. So, without realizing it, they create a safe distance. It's not contempt, it's self-preservation. The curious thing is that the more this protection works, the harder it becomes to distinguish whether loneliness is still defense or has already become identity. And that's exactly where the behavior begins to repeat itself almost automatically. There's a type of loneliness that doesn't stem from rejection. It stems from memory, from accumulated experiences that have taught, little by little, that getting close is costly. People like that didn't wake up one day deciding to be alone. They learned. They learned that some conversations become demands, that certain friendships ask for more than they offer, that closeness sometimes comes with expectation, invasion, and wear and tear. So the brain does what it always does to survive. It creates distance, not out of coldness, but out of adaptive intelligence. It's like someone who has already burned themselves too many times by touching the same surface. At some point, the body recoils even before the touch. Carl Jung observed that what protects us at first can, over time, become an invisible prison. The person starts by avoiding encounters that seem tiresome. Then, they respond to fewer messages. Later, they no longer feel like explaining their disappearance. On the outside, it seems like a choice. On the inside, it's a reflex, an emotional habit. And the curious thing is that this solitude doesn't come with drama. It comes with relief, silence, control, a strange feeling of peace. But this peace comes at a cost, because the more time passes in this mode of protection, the harder it becomes to differentiate who is a threat from who could be a refuge. And here something subtle, almost imperceptible happens. The person begins to see themselves as someone who is like this, reserved, independent, self-sufficient. These are labels that make sense up to a point. The problem is when they hide the fear of repeating old pains. Because deep down, it's not that this person doesn't know how to relate to others. They do. And precisely because they know, because they feel too much, because they perceive too much, they decided to shut themselves off. Loneliness becomes familiar territory, predictable, safe, but also limited. This pattern doesn't only appear in friendships. It spills over into habits, choices, routines. The person begins to prefer solitary activities, controlled environments, relationships without much depth. Not because they don't value connection, but because they've learned that depth hurts. Jung said that what we avoid outside tends to scream inside. And even when solitude seems comfortable, there's something there asking for attention. A slight discomfort, a question that arises at the end of the day, a feeling of being outside the world, not through exclusion, but through self-exile. And it is precisely at this point that the story becomes more interesting, because this protection, which was once necessary, begins to repeat itself without the person realizing if it still makes sense. What was defense may be becoming identity, and when that happens, loneliness ceases to be just a space for rest and begins to silently shape how that person relates to everything around them. Before diving into this topic, let's make a quick deal. If at any point in this video you recognize yourself, feel that someone has finally put into words something you experience but almost never managed to explain, leave a like now. This helps this content reach more people who also feel this way and think they are alone in the world. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe, because here the conversation isn't shallow. It's not empty motivation. It's about understanding your own mind, human behaviors, and the silent pains that almost no one talks about out loud. And comment too. You don't even need to write much. It can be a "this makes sense to me." It can be your experience or even a "I'd never thought about it that way." The comments become part of the conversation. They become an extension of the video. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Personalities who observe more than they participate. Some people enter a social environment as if analyzing a system. They observe gestures, remain silent, perceive contradictions. Jung spoke of individuals whose psychic energy is directed inward, not outward. These people do not reject relationships, but rarely feel comfortable in them. Superficial conversations are tiring, forced interactions are draining. Over time, distancing becomes routine. The problem is that the world often interprets this silence as coldness, when in fact it is an excess of perception. And this way of being in the world ends up influencing social habits that drive away potential friendships before they even begin. There is a type of person who enters a social environment as if arriving early to an empty room. They observe before occupying space. They notice details, the tone of voices, strange pauses, laughter that seems a little forced. While many people speak to be seen, this person listens to understand. And that changes everything. It's not shyness, it's not a lack of topics. It's a different way of being in the world. Carl Jung already pointed out that some personalities don't live turned outwards, toward the noise, but inwards, toward the meaning of things. And when someone like that enters a group, they don't feel out of place because they don't belong. They feel tired from noticing too much. These people tend to be great at reading the atmosphere. They notice when the conversation is empty, when someone speaks more for validation than for truth, when there's a social game behind something seemingly simple. And then a silent conflict arises. Participating requires pretending not to notice, pretending that everything is fine, pretending to be interested in subjects that mean nothing. Over time, this drains energy. It's not that the person doesn't like people, they just don't like the theatrics, so they prefer to stay quiet. Then they prefer to leave early. Then they prefer not to go at all. The problem is that the world interprets this behavior superficially. It says that the person is distant, cold, snobbish, difficult. But inside, what exists is an excess of awareness. Jung said that the more someone sees the invisible layers of relationships, the less comfortable they feel in them, because participating starts to have a high emotional cost. It's like watching a movie knowing the ending. The fun diminishes. Patience too. And little by little, this person begins to distance themselves, not because they hate bonds, but because they have ceased to be spontaneous. This appears in common situations. A happy hour after work, a family gathering, a group of friends always talking about the same things. For many, this is relaxing. For others, it is burdensome. The mind starts to work too hard. Why does everyone laugh at this? Why doesn't anyone talk about what really matters? Why does everything seem so superficial? These questions are not arrogance, they are incompatibility, but no one teaches how to deal with this. So the person adapts in the only way they know, staying on the sidelines. And the person continues to observe the world going by, understanding everything, feeling everything, but increasingly from the outside. And at some point, without realizing exactly when, an uncomfortable question arises. Did I distance myself because I don't fit in? Or because I learned too early not to get involved? The invisible weight of being different. Not everyone feels comfortable being who they are in a group. Jung observed that many social conflicts arise when a person realizes they need to play a role to be accepted. For some, this is just an inconvenience. For others, it's unbearable. These people prefer to be alone rather than live in social personas. The withdrawal doesn't happen due to a lack of skill, but due to internal coherence. But this choice comes at a price. The longer they stay away from relationships, the stranger the return seems. And without realizing it, the person begins to wonder if they still know how to connect, or if they never really knew how. There's a silent moment in many people's lives when it becomes clear. To be accepted, you'll have to act. Change your tone of voice, soften opinions, hide parts of your own personality. Laugh at things you don't find funny, feign interest. For some people, this is just social games. For others, it's a burden. Carl Jung said that the problem isn't wearing masks. Everyone does, but forgetting who you are underneath them. And some people realize this too early, and when they realize it, something breaks. These people join groups already feeling like they don't quite fit in, not because they're strange, but because they function differently. They think too much, feel too much, question too much. While the group seeks agreement, they see contradiction. While everyone wants to belong, they want meaning. The conflict arises there, because to fit in, it would be necessary to diminish important parts of themselves. And little by little, the idea of being accepted begins to sound like abandoning oneself. This appears in common situations. A circle of friends where everyone talks about the same things, repeats the same opinions, reacts in the same way. For some, this creates a bond. For others, it creates estrangement. The person realizes that if they say what they really think, it will generate discomfort, so they remain silent. And when silence becomes the rule, the connection begins to die, not for lack of topics, but for an excess of repressed authenticity. Jung observed that people who are very connected to their own identity tend to suffer more socially, not because they are difficult, but because they cannot live in diluted versions of themselves. They don't know how to be half. They are either whole or they don't fit in, and that comes at a high cost. Because the social world rewards adaptation, not depth. Those who don't adapt often end up on the sidelines, not because of direct exclusion, but because of silent incompatibility. Over time, this feeling becomes a constant discomfort. The person starts avoiding encounters, not because they don't like people, but because they leave them feeling wrong, as if they had to choose between belonging or respecting themselves. And they almost always choose to respect themselves. Loneliness in this case doesn't come from a lack of social skills, but from a refusal to live a life that doesn't seem real. It's an ethical, almost moral loneliness. But there's a delicate point here. When someone spends too much time protecting themselves in this way, they begin to believe that being different means being alone. That authenticity requires isolation. And that's not always true, but the mind learns this way when the experience is repeated. The person doesn't lose the desire for connection. They just start to doubt whether there's a place where they can be whole without paying too high an emotional price. And this doubt begins to shape every new social choice, even when no one notices. Habits that sabotage relationships without being noticed. The absence of friends rarely stems from a major event. It arises from small habits, cancelling appointments, responding little, avoiding intimacy, disappearing when the conversation gets too personal. Jung spoke of patterns that repeat themselves until they become conscious. The problem is that these behaviors seem rational in the short term, but isolate in the long term. The person doesn't feel the loss immediately. They only realize it when the silence extends too far. And when they try to return, they discover that the distance wasn't just external, it also settled in internally. There is a point where loneliness ceases to be a choice and becomes a habit, almost invisible. Not because the person doesn't want to connect, but because the body learns to avoid emotional exhaustion. Jung spoke a lot about how the mind creates defense mechanisms to preserve psychic energy. And here, this appears subtly. The person begins to distance themselves even before trying. They don't think, "I'm going to be alone." They think, "This will tire me out." Long meetings, superficial conversations, interactions that demand performance. All of this starts to sound like too much effort for a low emotional return. So she prefers silence, routine, her own thoughts. But the problem isn't liking to be alone. The problem is when isolation becomes the only safe place. Little by little, this person gets so used to their own company that any external presence seems invasive. And this creates a cruel paradox. The more time alone, the harder it becomes to share emotional space with someone. Not for lack of skill, but for excess self-control. She already knows how to regulate herself. She already knows how to deal with her own conflicts. She already understands her internal cycles. When someone enters, it disrupts this balance, and the mind, trying to protect what has been achieved, begins to reject bonds even before they are born. That's where many people confuse autonomy with closure. It seems like maturity, it seems like independence, but inside there is a constant warning: don't let them get too close. And this warning doesn't come out of nowhere. It stems from experiences where opening up costs too much. Loneliness in this case is not the absence of people, it's a sophisticated emotional strategy. And the more intelligent and sensitive a person is, the more efficient this strategy becomes, until the point where they begin to wonder why they feel so disconnected, even though they are so whole inside. When isolation becomes part of identity, after a while, not having friends ceases to be a circumstance and becomes an internal narrative. The person begins to define themselves like this: "I am this way." Jung warned that when we identify too much with a pattern, we lose the chance to transform it. Isolation begins to seem like an absolute choice, when often it was born as an adaptation. And it is at this point that an uncomfortable question arises. Does solitude still protect, or is it already limiting? This answer does not appear in an obvious way. It reveals itself in the next behaviors, in the next decisions, and especially in the next pattern that repeats itself. There comes a moment when the person realizes that it is not only they who have distanced themselves from the world has also stopped trying to reach them. And this hurts in a silent way, because no one fought, no one argued, no one slammed doors. The connections only became shallower, the messages more spaced out, the invitations rarer. And then a strange feeling is born, that of being remembered, but not being called. Jung said that what is not consciously experienced manifests as destiny, and here it appears as a repeated pattern. The person thinks they are fine as they are, but begins to feel a specific emptiness, different from common loneliness. It's the emptiness of not having anyone to share certain versions of themselves with. They laugh alone at something that no one else would understand, think about something too profound to become a casual conversation, feel things that don't fit into stories or quick replies. And the problem isn't a lack of people, it's a lack of emotional space. Little by little, this person begins to feel out of place, even when they are accompanied. They are at a full table, but with the feeling of watching from the outside. They listen, observe, understand, but don't mingle. Not out of superiority, but out of emotional incompatibility. They realize that adapting too much to fit in with others empties them, but remaining whole isolates them. And this internal tension is exhausting. That's when many people begin to question whether the price of authenticity is always loneliness. But the most delicate point comes now. When the person understands that they don't need to fit in everywhere, but they also can't live without any real exchange. The challenge isn't to go back to being who they were before, nor to shut themselves off completely. It's about learning to create bonds where there is depth, even if there are few. Because the human mind doesn't get sick from being alone. It gets sick when it feels it can't be seen as it really is. And that awareness changes everything. Perhaps the end point of all this isn't about having many friends, nor about learning some miraculous social technique, but about recognizing your own place in the world without distorting who you are to be accepted. Throughout this journey, it has become clear that loneliness doesn't arise from nothing. It is born from self-awareness, heightened sensitivity, the refusal to live shallow relationships, and the difficulty of finding people willing to go beyond the surface. Jung observed that the individuation process distances before it brings closer, because growing internally changes the type of bond you tolerate. And that's where the loops close. Those who know themselves better select more. Those who feel more demand more truth. Those who think more deeply talk less often. This is not a flaw, it's a consequence. The problem begins when a person confuses selectivity with isolation and starts to believe that they are not made to connect. That's not it. They just don't fit into every space. Psychological maturity demands a social price, but it also offers something rare: relationships that don't drain you, don't require masks, and don't ask you to diminish yourself to belong. The final reflection is simple and uncomfortable at the same time. Perhaps you are not alone because something is missing in you, but because you have stopped accepting what doesn't fulfill you. And the question that remains is not, why don't I have friends? But rather, what kind of connection makes sense for who I have become? Because when that answer becomes clear, loneliness ceases to be a burden and becomes a sign. And now that all the pieces fall into place, perhaps it's clear that it's not just about having or not having friends, but about understanding who you've become along the way, what masks you've had to wear, what silences you've accumulated, and what parts of yourself have been left without space to exist. If this video helped you see something that was confusing inside, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a like as a silent sign that this content made sense. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery, because the next videos delve even deeper into these themes that almost no one dares to face head-on. And comment below what else stuck in your mind after all this. Even if it's just a short sentence, sometimes writing is the first step to understanding. This space isn't just mine, it's ours. And the conversation doesn't end here, it continues within you.